This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company this Thursday. With me, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor frontbencher Nick Champion. Let's start with this story on the front page of The Australian. Palmer's deal for ailing firms. The report by David Crowe calls it a Palmer fund. Slush puppy is a reference by others to this inquiry that Clive Palmer wants to set up into industry support. What do you make of this story this morning and the proposal?
Well, look, my understanding is what's been agreed is that there will be a joint select committee that will look into the bill that he has brought into the Parliament. There's nothing unusual about that. In fact, I think that the Labor Party is in fact supporting another of Clive Palmer's wishes to have a parliamentary inquiry into the Queensland government. So, I mean, there's nothing unusual in having an inquiry. An inquiry itself, though, does not bind the government. The government looks at any recommendations made by an inquiry and it makes its own decisions.
That's all true, isn't it? Nick Champion, this inquiry into industry support was agreed to by Matthias Cormann, but it's only an inquiry and there's no commitment here.
They've done a dirty deal on other people's superannuation, a dirty deal on other people's school kid bonus to get their retrograde steps to abolish the mining tax through the Senate. And now we find, after a year of creating losers, right, kicking Holdens out of the country, kicking the car industry out of the country, you know, all this rhetoric around sort of not helping industry, not assisting industry, and now what do we have? Well, we have a little side deal to look at what it essentially is picking winners, a sort of slush fund to help companies who. But
this is not the government's idea.
Which, by the way,
well, the government's agreed to it. The government's agreed to it. Well, the government's agreed to it, right? And this is the path they're now going down. So it's a very interesting thing. Close down the car industry, which was a successful industry, an industry that had a future, and then on the other hand, a year later, here we are looking at a slush fund.
No. We haven't agreed to a fund.
Well, Kelly, you're taking one step down the road
don't confuse it.
Policy making.
It is an inquiry. It is nothing more than an inquiry. An inquiry will uncover all of the facts, including some of those points that you raised about the fact that industry assistance is actually not always the best outcome for our country, for Australian taxpayers.
Industry assistance worked in the car industry,
the Productivity Commission
let's hear Kelly, please. Let's hear Kelly.
The Productivity Commission did not agree with you on that. We spent billions of dollars subsidising international car companies, and they were going to pull out anyway, which is exactly what they pulled out on your watch.
What's the point then?
They pulled out on Labor's watch.
Kelly, if that's your view and that's the Productivity Commission's ruling, why is the government wasting time? Was it simply just to get Mr Palmer to agree to the repeal of the carbon tax? It was a bit of expedience to agree to a committee. OK, we'll do that to shut you up. Just sign on the line.
Well, look, I'm not in the exalted state of being a senator. I am merely a House of Reps member. But in the Senate, they actually have these rules where they all look at one another's bills, and there is the ability to actually look at these bills and have inquiries. You know, there's nothing remotely unusual about that. In fact, it is routine in the Senate. And I know Labor wants to beat this up into a frenzy because they've got nothing sensible to say. They're actually blocking savings from the budget. They're doing this 12 months on from an election where we were given a mandate to fix the budget. So they are engaging in mass distraction.
All right,
here.
Nick Champion, I want to ask you specifically, though, beyond the idea of a fund to help bail out businesses and a proposal like that, essentially what Palmer's looking at, I think, is similar to the Chapter 11 bankruptcy provisions in the United States, where companies can trade their way out of bankruptcy. What's your view on Mr Palmer's involvement in it, given his role as a mining businessman?
The Shadow Treasurer ruled out looking at or entertaining these proposals this morning, and that's what the government should do. If they were being consistent with their rhetoric, if they were being consistent with their flat earth economics, if they were being consistent, that's what they'd do. But instead, they've done a dirty deal, not just to get rid of people's superannuation, not just to, get rid of people's school kids' bonus, not just to attack small business tax concessions, but now they're going to go and look at this sort of boondoggle of a policy, picking, as I said before, picking winners, while they've in the past created a whole lot of losers.
I mean, it's just completely false.
You're taking,
in terms of superannuation,
one step down
do you fear that Labor's attack on this is going to resonate? Because we're talking about retirement savings for workers, and this is part of getting rid of a mining tax on multinationals.
So I mean, we actually have to go back to the facts here, because they're creating a massive fear campaign that is completely unjustified. And in fact, Bill Shorten has been completely dishonest in representing the case here. First point to make is when the tax review happened under Ken Henry specifically recommended against increasing the amount of superannuation that would be paid. He did that because he said it would be at a cost to workers. It would actually cost them in their pay packet, and he also noted that it was going to cost the budget through the tax measures that would then result in the government receiving less tax revenue. So you couldn't get a more emphatic response than that from Ken Henry, who the Labor Party likes to quote quite a lot. So Kevin Rudd went against that recommendation. It was increased. All we're simply doing is deferring it for 3 years.
Well, that's true. There will still be increases, won't there?
Well, we had the head of the employers' lobby out there yesterday saying that even though super had been delayed, wages wouldn't necessarily go up. And that's what she said. So we know that the employers have absolutely no intention to pass on what was a super increase into wages. What will actually happen is the workers are just going to lose that, and they're just going to lose that for the period of the delay, and the nation is going to lose those very important national savings, $128 billion. And for someone who's 25, they face losing $100,000 over their working life. So these are big changes.
Right.
If you make a small change, if you delay super, it makes a big impact later on. It makes a big impact for that individual. Big impact.
Well, you both made your point on that. I want to move on to talk about the state of the economy, because we saw the national accounts. What's your view on where things are at the moment, Kelly? I know that you're a very close observer of the nation's finances, as a member of the Economics Committee. What's your view on these numbers?
Well, look, obviously the government is focused on growth, and we are focused on making sure we can put in place the right framework to encourage growth. Now, that is something that we announced the budget through our infrastructure measures. We are trying to get the budget back on track, despite the frustrations of the Labor Party in actually obstructing us putting in place the right savings measures that we are going to need over the medium term in order to actually pull back from the increased spending that will only increase exponentially.
And in a context when we're seeing falling national income, as detailed and covered extensively by the Fin Review this morning.
There's nothing new in falling national income. I mean, we know that's actually in place. In fact, more than ever, it is incumbent upon the Labor Party now to explain how it is that they want to continue to increase spending, knowing that there is falling national income. What are they going to do as an alternative? They are simply going to raise taxes, and that is going to hurt every single Australian.
This is eventually going to come back to, I mean, it's very early days in the electoral cycle, but given this, which, as Kelly says, is not a new thing. We've known about these declining revenues for some time.
Things to be concerned about in this government: higher unemployment, tax on wages, and what we're seeing is an attack on confidence. So the government's measures, they've confected this sort of emergency. Their rhetoric has all been about this crisis, and they've scared people. And so consumer confidence is down, people are spending less, and that's affecting the real economy. Some things that I think as Australians we should be generally careful and cautious about and mindful of, and we should have a real debate about. I think the currency being so high for so long is a real issue. It's not something that is easily fixed, but I think we do need to have a talk about that. And obviously, when iron ore and coal falls, then that can have an effect on the government's budget.
Do you think when you say this, we should have a talk? Would you suggest something like what the Swiss have done with their currency?
Well, all I'm saying is currency is a big issue for every exporter in my electorate. It doesn't matter whether it was cars, didn't matter whether it was farms and people exporting hay. So I'm just saying we should be mindful of that. And the problem for the government is they went around the place saying there was no problem, the GFC caused no problems, there was no problems with revenue write-downs, and now they're looking down the barrel at revenue write-downs in their own budget.
Let's finish. We've only got a minute left, just 30 seconds each, on the prospect of changing the terror alert system. Do you think that there's merit in doing that?
Well, it's on medium level right now, and it's constantly under review by our national security agencies. I think we are best placed to take take advice from them as to what the alert should be, but we are looking at whether or not we have the right mechanisms in place in order to be able to determine what that level is, given that the world has become even more complex and the terror threat that much more diverse.
Nick Champion, what's your view on that story this morning?
This is a terror alert system that's been in place since John Howard was Prime Minister. It's served Australia well. I guess if the government intends to review it, you know, we'll wait and see what they do. But we do need to be mindful that this has been in place for 11 years and as far as I can see, served Australia well.
Nick Champion and Kelly O'Dwyer, thank you very much.